way through in civic leadership
Uh-huh.
at Lipscomb. And we're doing a case study that will hopefully be historic in nature and factual, and we're meeting with all realms from government to the creative class to tourism and business. And this case study is going to be comprehensive on the Music City brand itself.
Okay.
So we thought naturally, and your name of course came up in so many discussions, this would be a great fit.
Okay, so it's actually specific, because I noticed your questions were more about Music City rather than the state's branding of music, which is...
And we're going to go with that too. We're going to ask you some
because
questions.
it didn't come... Actually, the roots, we were using music in Tennessee for the last 20, 30 years, just like Memphis has used the blues and R&B and rock and roll with Elvis. You know, they celebrate those anniversaries in the birthplace of country music up in Bristol with the sessions up there, and all the various forms of rockabilly came out of Jackson. So it goes across the whole state, and I just think Nashville's done an incredible job recognizing that it was, for them, basically country music to start, although it certainly evolved into all different types of genres of music and ever evolving off of each other, but which contributes to the branding of the entire state. But the entire state does not derive its branding from Music City. Music City was branded, in 2005? I remember when they launched it as Music City, and it was like, that's great. You know, it's really going to be fun to see that, and I love it on every, the street corners, and before there was a conference center, that was what they had in mind to call it, and not to give naming rights to anybody, but to call it the Music City Center. That was brilliant. So that certainly helps with the whole state brand, but if, specific to Music City, then I noticed your questions were more about that.
Yeah, so it is the Music City brand, but from your perspective, and the reason we want to talk to you as commissioner, is music as a whole, and then of course every individual locale is going to brand in their own way. But the first question is, from your perspective, how does it affect, and or we get it probably doesn't direct the state brand, but for instance,
No.
Justin Timberlake's on the cover.
Yeah, he was from Memphis. He's from Millington, which is just a little bit north of Memphis, but he considers himself a Memphian, and we love that he's JT and the Tennessee Kids, but it all started in Memphis for him. So that's exactly to my point, is that we've got such a wealth of musicians from across the state, and people who come from other places, but they make their best music here. So they come here to live, and they all are kind of learning off of each other and trying new things out, and the music types keep changing. And I've got a 16-year-old grandson. His music is completely different than mine, completely different than a 22-year-old's. And he's got bands that he knows of here, and these names, I have no idea what they are, but they're getting their, they'll pick up from dubstep, or they'll pick up from these other genres that are coming from overseas, and they start grafting them into a whole new sound here in Nashville. So, I mean, it is ever evolving. And when we had come together as an industry, the governor had put this strategic group together, the Tennessee Tourism Committee, to bring everybody from around the state, at least a representative group from across the state, for the tourism industry to recognize and make its case of what it could be in terms of economic development for the entire state and for our Tennessee's economy, and also to get buy-in from them and to determine their own branding and an overarching brand, what they all could feel there would be buy-in on. And the statement that came from all of that, maybe 18 months of study and going across and doing town hall forums across the state with the tourism industry and other just interested partners from across the state, was that we wanted to become the global music destination of choice. And I think and it named several different genres of music at the crossroads of beautiful scenery and historic. And I'm paraphrasing that. You can get that out of the front of the Tennessee Tourism's. There's a strategic plan that was second. I'm trying to remember what we called the first one, but it was the first thing they gave the governor that showed this is the opportunity that we have with tourism in the state, and we needed to have some idea of what that brand of the state should look like that everyone could buy into. But music was the focal point for every part of the state. So Music City, they jumped on that one. That's great. And it certainly bolsters the entire state, but every region of the state feels that a big part of what they have to offer. Manchester with Bonnaroo. You know, that has nothing to do with Nashville. That's this little, and it's actually a Knoxville impresario, Ashley Capps, that puts that on. And his love for music, he's kind of revitalized their scene over there for the last 35 years. So he brought Bonnaroo to life. That's just taken on a life of its own now. Chattanooga the same way, Riverfront. I'm just excited every time I hear about a new festival, because there is such a wealth of musicianship here in the state. What's the group? The band Perry is from, Greenville,
In Kings
which
of
is
Leon?
way up in Northeast Kings of Leon, just south, in Columbia. So it's just, there's no way to say it's just in one part of the state. Certainly, though, the Grand Ole Opry was one of the reasons why everybody started to think of music with Tennessee, because that went out, all across the country. And then we started having the stars that were making crossover. Dolly was one of those, into the movies back in the 80s, and people started to get to know her. And I'm the girl from the south side of Chicago, that she was probably the
Evanston,
first.
right?
No, I went to school at Northwestern, but I grew up on the south side, actually in the city, and we thought we owned the blues in Chicago, which then I get, wake up call when I moved, when I come down here and go over to Stax, it's
Wow.
like, maybe we didn't. But it was, where was I going with this, the story about Chicago? Oh, just recognizing that there are these incredible, like when with Dolly, these incredible iconic figures. I don't know that I knew she was from Tennessee. I just knew that she was country, and I knew that when she got into the movies and the whole 9 to 5 thing, and was funny, and then Straight Talk and her later stuff, then I started listening to a little bit of her music and ended up working for her. But I would say that her crossing over into other genres, she started to bring the country music to the rest of the world, and then ended up bringing the rest of the world back to country music. So there's several like that, but she's one of the first biggest ones. And you watch Taylor Swift do that now with a new audience, with the new. There's many people would go country, no, she's a pop star, or she's a songwriter, which Dolly was. And then so it's funny when you go back, you start tracing those roots. You keep coming back to Tennessee. You keep finding all these things emanating from Tennessee. And now, and I think this is where Nashville's done an incredible job of recognizing it, embracing it, nurturing it. They've done the documentary that certainly shows the roots of it, is that the musicians really respect other musicians, and they respect the songwriters, and they respect the people that, not just the ones that are on stage with the mic in front of them. There is a great respect for the entire product of music, and that's just kind of gone out, I think, to everybody. I'm not a musician, but I definitely recognize we've got something special here in Music City, and I have the opportunity to go across the state all the time with what I do, and I cannot tell you, every time I end up in some little club in Knoxville or someplace, some little festival in Lawrenceburg or something, these musicians are phenomenal. It's in the water or something, which Tennessee means meeting of the rivers, so I think it is in the water. So at least that's one of the it's an Indian name, Tanasi, that they think, some people think that was the original name. There's some dispute over that. I don't know if it's dispute, but.
Well, you just said something that we heard. We interviewed John Ozier from Ole Records, and he was talking about the uniqueness of the songwriting family and the community, wherever you are. He said it's much different than if you're in LA or New York. This whole neighborly, familial feel that you have. People care about each other. It doesn't matter if you are the star in front of the mic or you're somebody behind the scenes. That it's just this very interesting, close-knit group.
And they are very respectful of each other. They'll talk about each other. They'd like to rib each other, if you hear the songwriters and stuff. And I'm sure there's some competition to get your, record done by somebody that's, to get on their album. But I see such camaraderie, and it's really an interesting phenomenon. And I don't think I've seen it. I've lived all over the country. I've lived in California, lived in New York City. So great music you can hear anywhere, but the best music is made here. You know, this is where it's created, I think, the most of it. And certainly there's great people everywhere that have chosen to live elsewhere, but great producers are here, and that's where the Music City, it's more than just those of us. I can't sing that well. I mean, I was in the chorus in high school. I don't play other than, you know, I can read music and kind of bang out a few things on the piano, but I love music, and it's one of the things that attracted me to Tennessee. I love music.
So when you say the best music is
Made
here as in Tennessee or here as in Nashville?
I would say in Tennessee.
Okay.
Certainly the production of it is here. There's some that's produced elsewhere. There's some that's produced in Memphis. There's some that's produced in Knoxville. They're, you know, on a smaller scale, but really the big industry is here, and how fortunate we are to have that kind of an integrated, you know, from the tour buses are made here, the backup singers are here, the people that are gonna find the talent, develop the talent, and the people that actually make the music and produce it and sweeten it and the whole thing. So when you start stacking all that together, that gives you even more that you can do with it. So yeah, this is a pretty special place, and you can bring people in who tell you, I don't like country music. It's like, that's fine, come on. And then even take them down to Lower Broad, and we're going to go in here and listen. And they are still blown away by the caliber of talent.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter where you go. Doesn't matter where you go. You can't find a bad one. Even the kids on the street sometimes that are playing are phenomenal. And it's they've consciously embraced it. I think that's great. You know, you come in. I just got in late last night from the airport, and sure enough, you know, they're playing. And you got the singers that are kind of introducing whether, you know, by the way, we're the Athens of the South. I'm Phil Vassar, coming da-da-da-da. We've got Vanderbilt, Belmont, blah, blah, blah. And I love it. It's, you know, there are, that's the core of our creative class, but that has attracted the other creative class, the writers, and the people who love to work in technology in a creative way, and the people who love to, even in healthcare. I mean, we've had so much creativity in the healthcare field, and that tree has grown like almost in a parallel way. But I think people who are creative people, no matter what industry they're in, are drawn to creativity and love. Usually, who doesn't love music? Who doesn't love music? You may have different taste than I do, but my grandson is every bit as passionate about the music he's listening to as I was when I was growing up, and the music I was listening to and listen to now. I mean, it is truly that backdrop to everything that we do. And that's a universal language. Brand USA, which is now the international promotional arm of the United States, was put into law, the Travel Promotion Act back in 2009, signed into law by Barack Obama, which we were very grateful for, and the Congress passed that. It took a long time to get that passed, but they created Brand USA, and what they found was the core message was, let's use music. We were like, yeah. And then they used Roseanne Cash to write a song that they put in their advertising. And so, I mean, that will evolve into other campaigns, but yes, it is. And then against that music, and her singing this wonderful song that you can listen to online, but there's shots of the Grand Canyon and shots of New Orleans. We would like to have a few shots of Tennessee, but when they did this, they didn't ask us for footage, and so the original ones didn't come up with that. But it is Roseanne, and it was Tennessean and living in New York, but a Tennessean, and pretty exciting to see people resonate with that message of music and know that we own it. I really believe you will not find better music anywhere else. You can find great music other places, but I think the best music is here, and it's constantly evolving. In fact, it's funny, we went to Music City Roots. I brought my grandson with me, and we were listening to a bluegrass band, which is not his thing, but then the guy who does it, Todd Mayo, came over and introduced him to Chris, and he said something about, and Jack White was here, and Chris's eyes lit up, and he said, you know Jack White? He goes, yeah, Jack comes to this all the time. He loves this music. Okay. This was a moment of aha for my grandson, who was like, well, if he thinks this music's important, and he's got this stable at Third Man Records, it's incredible, then, in fact, he's thinking of doing his own. Well, I shouldn't, this isn't for public consumption, but Todd said, we've said, hey, we should do a Music City Roots. It's all about you and your staple musicians.
Wow.
And so they may do that one day. And Chris is like, I gotta be there for that. So, I mean, that's why when I say they respect each other, even though they're not playing that, they recognize the musicianship, they recognize the importance of all those. It's that tree of music that keeps growing here.
So you're all over the state.
Yeah.
Do you think, or what do you think allows this culture? Is it just the music, or is there some underlying culture that?
Boy, isn't that a good question?
Yeah.
Which came first, chicken or the egg?
Right.
I think that because this is an interesting, it was kind of cosmopolitan back in the day, when it was first getting started. The folks over in East Tennessee are Irish, Scottish. They, are immigrants. They are hardscrabble, Appalachian Mountains, came with all those musical traditions. Take what's coming up from the Delta, when there was the migration after, there were plantations, obviously, in the Memphis area. But even that huge migration after the Civil War that came up to Memphis and those areas where there was work and things, and that music that had come, New Orleans with French, the Creole, Cajun, coupled with what was happening from all those folks that had been, not in a good way, forced to come over to America from Africa, but they brought all those musical traditions. That's all swirling around. That's why New Orleans music is great too. It really is great. That comes up the Delta. It's sitting in Memphis, and you'll hear those guys talking about the early ones, like when we talked to Isaac Hayes before he passed, and he was involved in our TV spots in the very beginning. Dolly and Isaac at the very beginning, like 11 years ago, and he said we would listen to the Grand Ole Opry when I was growing up. It was on the radio and we listened. So Hank Williams and those guys, that was having an influence on what they were doing on Beale Street. Well, how does that work? I don't know. I'm not a musician, but it did. And vice versa. Jimi Hendrix was here in Nashville. And yet, so much of his music is not a traditional country at all, but it certainly had its impact on the music scene in the state. So, and then the rockabilly, where we had the guys that are from Jackson, and Elvis was sort of that too. He did play a lot of that, but came up from Mississippi with the blues. He was the white guy that sounded black too, that, it was okay to do. So Sun Records starts recording him. He's brought over, he records here in Nashville. That sound starts to affect things. I don't know which came first. I don't know if it was all those musical traditions and those cultures that were here. The kind of people that came from the north after the war that settled in, carpetbaggers, all of us Yankees that moved down here. But the carpetbaggers brought their own traditions down here and were affected by that. And then I just think over the years, that cross-pollination, I think it is tied in with the music. I do. I think people and their cultures bring their music, and there was something about, you'll hear the traditions of, we did a documentary, we have a sesquicentennial Civil War Commission, and we had several historians on it, and we did a documentary with NPT about the music of the Civil War. And some of it was very, when Johnny Comes Marching Home kind of stuff, and there was others, it was really born out of just these soulful things that were just the pain and suffering that was going on in the fields. People began to sing that, and it was, I'm not enough of a history expert on Tennessee to know which would have influenced which, but I think there is something pretty special about the people who just, you'll hear about, they'll talk about, oh yeah, we would have Thanksgiving, and then we'd get out afterwards and people would bring out their fiddles, not violins, their fiddles and their guitars, and they would just sing. And somebody be on the piano. And gospel, huge influence, both in Memphis and, the soft notes down in Lawrence County, that's just south of Murray County and down in that neck of the woods. Huge thing for the Southern Gospel Quartet kind of stuff. Boy, you start seeing all that. And then the contemporary Christian, which fed off of some of it was country, some of it was just pop music that was growing up in Nashville, and all of that is just amazing. Who's been interested in coming, And if you don't know how to sing, but you want to be around it, then you learn how to produce. You've got a good ear for it, and that's what I see sometimes with some of the kids who may not be I mean, I will say it's pretty daunting when you're in class with a 13-year-old and your friend sits down and starts banging it out, and you're like, oh, I'll never be that good. So you think I shouldn't even try, but you're fascinated by it. So, I mean, now I've got Chris at school. He goes to middle college, high school in Franklin. And they have a whole audio production thing where he's got GarageBand on his computer, and he plays it for me, this music, and he's basically doing these mixes and stuff. And he can't play much. He's got a couple of guitars, but I can't play and he'll fill in like 6 different kids. But he loves it. Yeah. And that just, to me, what he's doing, who knows how that may influence, because all that electronic stuff, which I would have said, that's not music.
Right.
It is.
Yep.
It sounds. It's really different.
Yeah. We have asked all of our interviewees to explain what they think the Music City brand is in their own words. I know you've touched on this throughout what you just said, but
City brand.
if you were to describe
I would
the Music City
say
brand.
that Music City is the epicenter of music collaboration and evolution and production. Those 3 things. Because the people will come here from other places. They collaborate with other great musicians and songwriters. They're good writers. The South produces a lot of good writers because they're telling stories. And so the stories are cool. And then you find the musicians know how to kind of incorporate all these great things. And then to be able to produce those things, it's pretty spectacular to see the level of talent there, and to distribute and get all that. That's the business side, but still important so these guys can eat. And then the ever evolving part, because they're constantly collaborating with new types of musicians, people that maybe they didn't grow up with, but they respect, so they listen, and that has an effect on them. So I would say collaboration, evolution,
And production.
would be, they pretty much are the epicenter. Therefore, I mean, can you say they own it? That happens other places, but I think in the mind of the consumer and a tourist, they're beginning to own it.
John Orzo talked about music being the seed, and you touched on it a little bit about there's so many other things connected to it. You just said a little bit about the business side of it, the lawyers, the agents, all these things.
Building the buses out.
Building the
first
buses
time
out.
somebody said that to me, we
Yeah.
actually build the tour buses, and